INFJs are often painted as gentle, wise, and deeply empathetic. But what if I told you there's another side no one talks about? Behind their compassion and quiet nature lies a set of dark traits, hidden shadows that even they struggle to admit. Today, we're diving into the 8 dark sides of INFJs nobody warns you about. Watch closely, because by the end, you'll see the INFJ in a completely new light. And don't forget to subscribe, because the truth about personality psychology goes much deeper than you think. Emotional withdrawal that feels like abandonment. One of the most misunderstood aspects of the INFJ personality is their tendency to withdraw emotionally when they're hurt, overwhelmed, or betrayed. On the surface, it looks cold, even heartless, like they've suddenly stopped caring. But in reality, this retreat isn't about punishing others, it's about survival. INFJs feel emotions at such an intense level that sometimes the only way to protect themselves is to pull back entirely, creating distance until they can process what's happening inside. This withdrawal can feel devastating to those around them. Imagine being close to an INFJ, sharing deep conversations, receiving their empathy, and feeling their steady support, only for them to suddenly disappear into silence. To friends, partners, or family, it feels like abandonment. One day, the INFJ is present and nurturing. The next, they seem unreachable, hidden behind walls that no amount of pleading or effort can break through. This shift is so abrupt that it leaves people questioning what went wrong, often without ever receiving an answer. The truth is, INFJs don't withdraw because they stop caring. They withdraw because they care too much. Their empathy absorbs emotions like a sponge, and when the weight becomes unbearable, when they feel betrayed, dismissed, or suffocated, they instinctively retreat to protect their mental and emotional health. It's like a circuit breaker, flipping off before the entire system burns out. But here's the darker side. This withdrawal isn't always temporary. While some INFJs only need solitude to recharge, others shut down for good. If trust has been broken deeply enough, their emotional exit can become permanent. They won't yell, argue, or make dramatic scenes. They'll simply fade away. And because they rarely explain themselves, the people left behind often feel blindsided, unsure why the connection ended so abruptly. This silent retreat is especially confusing in romantic relationships. A partner may misinterpret the INFJ's need for space as rejection or lack of love, but what's actually happening is much more complex. The INFJ is overwhelmed by the intensity of their emotions and doesn't know how to express them without causing more harm. So instead of fighting or lashing out, they disappear, leaving the other person feeling abandoned at the very moment they need them most. For the INFJ, this dark side is both a curse and a shield. On one hand, it protects them from emotional overload and allows them to regain balance. On the other, it isolates them from people who genuinely care. Over time, repeated withdrawal can erode relationships, creating distance that's nearly impossible to close. And because INFJs rarely explain their inner world, those who love them may never fully understand why they left. This is the paradox of the INFJ. They love deeply, but when their heart is wounded, their silence speaks louder than words. Their withdrawal isn't about indifference, it's about self-preservation. But to the outside world, it feels like abandonment, and that misunderstanding is part of what makes this dark side so powerful and so painful. Silent resentment that builds over time. If there's one thing INFJs rarely do, it's explode in the moment. Unlike personalities who vent openly when they're hurt, INFJs often swallow their frustration. They nod, they smile, they keep the peace. On the outside, it looks like they've let things slide, but inside, something else is happening. They're quietly storing those slights, betrayals, and disappointments in the deepest corners of their mind, where they turn into silent resentment. This resentment doesn't show up overnight. It's subtle, almost invisible at first. A cutting comment from a friend, a lack of appreciation at work, a partner ignoring their needs. It might seem small in isolation, and to avoid conflict, the INFJ convinces themselves to let it go. But instead of truly letting it go, they internalize it. They replay it later when they're alone. They analyze it from every angle, wondering if they're overreacting, questioning whether the other person meant harm, and often blaming themselves for being too sensitive. But here's the truth. These little hurts don't vanish. They stack. Layer by layer, they build into a heavy emotional weight. And because INFJs rarely unload this weight onto others, it festers. The resentment simmers beneath their calm surface, often unnoticed by those around them. People assume everything is fine because the INFJ hasn't said otherwise. What they don't realize is that the INFJ's silence doesn't equal forgiveness. It often means they're keeping score. The dark side of this is that when the resentment finally spills over, it shocks everyone. To the INFJ, the pattern was obvious. They can trace back every moment where their boundaries were crossed or their efforts dismissed. But to the outside world, the INFJ's eventual withdrawal, coldness, or even sudden cutoff feels like it came out of nowhere. Friends and partners are left asking, "What did I do wrong?" Not realizing the INFJ has been silently collecting answers for months or even years. This is why INFJs are sometimes accused of ghosting or burning bridges without warning. In their mind, the warnings were there all along. In the small hesitations, in the subtle change of tone, in the moments where they gave less of themselves. But because INFJs rarely verbalize their resentment directly, others don't recognize the danger until it's too late. In relationships, this silent buildup can be destructive. An INFJ partner may smile and accommodate for years, only to one day decide they're done. To the other person, it feels like abandonment. To the INFJ, it feels like the only logical conclusion after carrying unspoken pain for too long. In friendships, it can lead to sudden distance that no one can explain. And in workplaces, it's the quiet resignation letter that shocks a boss who thought everything was fine. The harsh reality is that this silent resentment isn't just about others. It also damages the INFJ internally. Holding on to pain without expressing it eats away at their peace of mind. It creates tension in their body, stress in their mind, and doubt in their heart. Yet, because they're so conflict averse, they'd rather carry the burden quietly than risk open confrontation. This is the dark paradox of the INFJ. Their empathy makes them absorb more than most, but their silence keeps them from releasing it. And over time, what looks like patience and tolerance is actually resentment building in the shadows, waiting for the day when it finally tips into detachment. Perfectionism that destroys inner peace. At first glance, perfectionism doesn't sound like a dark side. To the outside world, it looks like diligence, responsibility, and high standards. People admire INFJs for their attention to detail, their dedication, and the way they always seem to give more than what's required. But what most people don't see is the toll it takes on the INFJ's inner world. Behind that polished exterior lies an exhausting cycle of self-criticism, overthinking, and relentless striving that slowly destroys their peace of mind. For an INFJ, perfectionism isn't about wanting things to be good, it's about needing things to be flawless. They don't just want to succeed, they feel compelled to exceed every expectation, including their own impossibly high ones. It shows up in small ways, like rewriting a message 3 times before sending it, or stressing over how a conversation might have been perceived. And it shows up in larger life-altering ways, like delaying big projects, relationships, or opportunities because they don't feel ready or good enough yet. This constant need to measure up creates an invisible battlefield in the INFJ's mind. On one side is their desire to create, to contribute, to step into their potential. On the other side is the critical inner voice that whispers, "It's not enough. You're not enough. Try harder." And no matter how much they accomplish, that voice rarely quiets down. It pushes them into endless cycles of revision, hesitation, and second guessing, all while draining their energy and joy. The dark part of this perfectionism is that it often paralyzes more than it motivates. Instead of fueling progress, it creates procrastination. An INFJ may spend hours preparing for something, but never actually act because the thought of failure or worse, imperfection feels unbearable. They'd rather hold on to an untouched idea in their mind where it's flawless than risk bringing it into the real world and seeing it fall short. This inner war is especially brutal because INFJs already feel misunderstood by the world. Their perfectionism becomes a way of compensating for that. They think, if I can just do everything right, no one will reject me, no one will misunderstand me. But in reality, perfectionism doesn't protect them, it isolates them. It convinces them to hide their authentic self behind standards that no one else is actually demanding. In relationships, this perfectionism can push INFJs to overgive and overextend. Trying to be the perfect friend, partner, or family member, they absorb responsibilities that aren't theirs, blame themselves for other people's unhappiness, and criticize themselves for not doing enough. Over time, this creates resentment, not just toward others, but toward themselves, for never being able to rest without guilt. The cruelest part is that perfectionism robs INFJs of the very thing they crave most: peace. Their mind rarely stops running, their heart rarely feels content, and their spirit rarely feels free. What looks like strength to outsiders is often a mask for deep inner turmoil. And this is why perfectionism isn't a hidden gift. It's a hidden wound. It disguises itself as discipline and excellence, but underneath, it eats away at confidence, creativity, and joy. The INFJ pays for their perfection with sleepless nights, overanalyzed decisions, and the quiet belief that nothing they do will ever truly be enough. Manipulative empathy. At first glance, empathy seems like the purest and most admirable quality an INFJ has. They're known for their ability to feel what others feel, to step into someone else's shoes, and to understand perspectives most people overlook. But here's the uncomfortable truth no one talks about. Empathy in the wrong hands or under enough stress can become a weapon. For INFJs, this weapon often takes the form of manipulative empathy, a subtle, almost invisible tactic that even they don't always realize they're using. How does this happen? Imagine someone who can sense your emotions before you've even admitted them to yourself. An INFJ notices the tension in your voice, the hesitation in your words, or the flicker of insecurity in your eyes. They know what will calm you, what will motivate you, and what will cut straight to the heart of your fears. Most of the time, they use this insight to support, comfort, or guide you. But when an INFJ feels cornered, unappreciated, or betrayed, that same skill can morph into a quiet, calculated form of influence. Instead of yelling or demanding, they can gently steer your emotions in a direction that serves their needs. They might withhold just enough warmth to make you chase their approval. They might mirror your feelings so closely that you start doubting your own judgment, or they might frame their disappointment in a way that leaves you drowning in guilt, even when the situation isn't entirely your fault. To the outside world, it looks like care, but beneath the surface, it's control. This doesn't mean INFJs are malicious manipulators by nature. It's more complicated than that. Their manipulative empathy usually arises when they've been giving too much for too long and feel powerless to express their anger directly. Instead of exploding, they turn to quiet, emotional strategies that help them regain balance without open confrontation. They tell themselves it's for the greater good, or that they're just guiding someone to do the right thing. But the reality is, it's still manipulation, soft, hidden, and incredibly effective. The danger lies in how invisible it is. Unlike aggressive manipulation, which is easy to spot, INFJ manipulative empathy feels almost natural. You don't realize you've been nudged, guilted, or redirected until long after it's happened. This is why people sometimes walk away from INFJ relationships feeling emotionally drained or subtly controlled, even if they can't point to a single explosive fight or obvious power struggle. For the INFJ, this dark side is painful too. Deep down, they don't want to manipulate. They want authenticity and harmony, but because they fear conflict and rejection, they sometimes weaponize empathy as a defense mechanism. And ironically, this habit pushes them further away from the genuine connection they crave. Instead of being fully understood and accepted, they become trapped in a cycle of control disguised as care. The real cost of manipulative empathy is trust. Once people realize that empathy is being used as a tool of influence rather than compassion, they start to question the INFJ's intentions. That suspicion cuts deep because it undermines the very quality INFJs take the most pride in, their ability to connect and heal. And unless the INFJ becomes aware of this shadow in themselves, they risk turning their greatest gift into their most damaging weapon. Overthinking that leads to paralysis. One of the most misunderstood struggles INFJs face is their tendency to overthink everything. At first, this looks like a strength. INFJs analyze deeply, consider multiple perspectives, and think through the consequences of their actions before moving forward. It's part of what makes them insightful, strategic, and often ahead of others. But when this natural ability tips too far, it transforms into something destructive, mental paralysis. INFJs are wired to search for meaning in every detail. A casual text message, a slight change in tone, or a glance that others would dismiss can trigger hours of reflection. They replay conversations in their minds, dissecting every word and micro-expression, convinced there's something hidden beneath the surface. While this allows them to catch nuances that others miss, it also traps them in endless loops of what if and maybe. Decisions that should take minutes can stretch into days because the INFJ is terrified of missing something important. This paralysis shows up in relationships, careers, and even small everyday choices. In relationships, INFJs might hesitate to express their feelings because they've overanalyzed every possible reaction their partner might have. At work, they may delay launching a project because they've thought through so many outcomes that none feels safe. Even something as simple as choosing between two opportunities can feel overwhelming because they see not just the options, but the entire web of consequences attached to each one. The irony is that this overthinking often keeps INFJs stuck in situations they desperately want to escape. They'll recognize red flags in relationships, but stay frozen because they're overanalyzing whether they're being too sensitive or misreading things. They'll dream of pursuing their purpose, but remain stuck in unfulfilling jobs because they've convinced themselves there's always one more detail to figure out before making the leap. The result is frustration, regret, and a haunting sense of wasted time. What makes this dark side so painful is that INFJs know they're doing it. They can see themselves spiraling into analysis, but stopping feels impossible. Their intuition pushes them to consider every angle, and their empathy makes them worry about how their decisions will affect everyone else. Combined, this creates a mental cage where action feels too risky and inaction feels equally suffocating. Over time, this overthinking erodes confidence. Instead of trusting their initial insights, which are often remarkably accurate, they start doubting themselves. They look for external validation, which rarely comes in the way they need. And the longer they hesitate, the more they feel powerless. This is why INFJs sometimes retreat into isolation. They're exhausted from living inside their own heads. The dark reality is that overthinking doesn't protect INFJs from pain, it prolongs it. The job they never take, the relationship they never walk away from, the dream they never pursue, these lost opportunities become silent wounds that weigh heavier with time. And until they learn to break free from this mental loop, overthinking will always be one of the most paralyzing traps in their journey. Cold detachment when trust is broken. For most people, when trust is broken, there's usually a messy mix of arguing, tears, apologies, or attempts at repair. But for INFJs, it doesn't work that way. Trust, to them, is sacred. And when it's shattered, it feels like the entire foundation of the relationship has collapsed. There's no yelling, no long speeches, no repeated second chances. Instead, what happens is something far more unsettling: cold detachment. INFJs are known for their warmth and empathy, the way they pour themselves into relationships with an intensity few can match. When they trust you, it isn't casual, it's complete. They open up their inner world, the deepest part of themselves that they usually guard so carefully. But that depth comes with risk. If someone betrays, lies to, or disrespects them in a way that cuts too deep, the INFJ doesn't fight to hold on to the bomb. Instead, they shut it off like flipping a switch. This detachment shocks people because it feels sudden, almost ruthless. One day you may have access to all their warmth, care, and attention, and the next it's gone. You'll still see them smile politely, maybe even carry on small talk, but their energy is no longer there. It's as if you're looking at them from behind glass. They've withdrawn emotionally, and once that door closes, it rarely reopens. What makes this dark side so painful is its invisibility. INFJs don't always announce that they're done. They don't slam the door or make dramatic exits. They simply retreat into themselves, leaving the other person feeling abandoned without explanation. To the outside world, it may seem cold or unforgiving, but inside, it's an act of survival. Because for an INFJ, staying emotionally connected to someone who has violated their trust is like standing in a burning building. Walking away, detaching completely, is the only way to stop getting burned. This cold detachment also ties into their perfectionist and idealistic nature. Once an INFJ has seen you betray their trust, their mind begins replaying the entire relationship in a new light. Every word, every action, every inconsistency suddenly makes sense through the lens of betrayal. And once they've pieced it together, they don't just lose trust in you, they lose the will to even try rebuilding it. To them, it's already over. The unsettling truth about this dark side is how final it feels. People often think they can apologize, explain, or charm their way back into the INFJ's heart, but INFJs rarely reopen doors they've closed. They don't cut ties often, but when they do, it's with surgical precision. And that's what makes their cold detachment so powerful. It's not revenge, it's not punishment, it's simply their way of saying, "You had my trust once, you won't get the chance to break it again." In the end, this is one of the darkest yet most protective traits of an INFJ. Their empathy makes them vulnerable, but their ability to shut off that empathy when necessary is what saves them. It may feel brutal to those on the receiving end, but for the INFJ, it's the ultimate act of self-preservation, the savior complex that drains them. INFJs are natural healers, but one of their darker struggles is the unconscious urge to save people who are broken, lost, or destructive. This savior complex feels noble at first. You see someone's pain, you recognize their potential, and you convince yourself that if you just give enough love and support, you can help them change. But what starts as compassion quickly becomes a trap. You pour endless energy into fixing others while your own needs go ignored. The problem is, not everyone wants to be saved. Some people exploit your empathy, taking without giving back. Others resist change entirely, no matter how much you sacrifice. Instead of creating balance, these relationships drain you until you're exhausted, resentful, and questioning your worth. Deep down, the savior complex often comes with guilt. If you step back, you feel selfish. If you set boundaries, you feel like you're abandoning someone. This guilt keeps you locked in cycles of overgiving, where you carry responsibilities that were never yours to begin with. Manipulative personalities especially take advantage of this. They know you'll keep forgiving, keep giving, and keep trying long after most people would have walked away. And while you think you're helping, what's really happening is that you're being pulled deeper into someone else's chaos at the expense of your own peace. The hard truth is that saving people isn't always love. Sometimes it's control disguised as compassion. The INFJ's greatest growth comes when you realize that you can support others without destroying yourself. Walking away doesn't make you cold. It makes you wise enough to know that not every battle is yours to fight. Dual personality, public was private self. One of the most misunderstood aspects of INFJs is how different they appear in public compared to who they are in private. On the surface, you might seem composed, friendly, and approachable. You can smile through social gatherings, hold polite conversations, and adapt to the expectations of the people around you. To most, you look like you have everything together, but behind that carefully crafted exterior lies a very different reality, a private self that few ever see. This duality isn't about being fake, it's a survival strategy. As an INFJ, you're hyper-aware of how others perceive you, and you often adjust to keep the peace or avoid unnecessary conflict. You might play the role of the reliable friend, the calm coworker, or the supportive partner, even when you're overwhelmed or drained inside. But when you're finally alone, the mask slips. That's when the exhaustion surfaces, when the doubts, overthinking, and emotional weight come rushing in. The dark side of this dual personality is that it can create distance even in close relationships. People think they know you, but what they see is often only the version of you that feels safe to show. Meanwhile, the real you, the one who wrestles with doubts, depth, and intensity, stays hidden. This makes you feel unseen even by those closest to you. Over time, this split between public and private self can take a toll. You risk feeling like you're living two lives, the one everyone believes and the one you actually inhabit. And while it protects you from judgment, it can also leave you lonely because few ever get to know the true depth of who you are. The truth is, being an INFJ comes with light and shadow. The same depth, empathy, and intuition that make you extraordinary also carry hidden struggles that few people ever notice. And while others might never fully understand the intensity of your inner world, you know it's both your gift and your burden. The question isn't whether these dark sides exist, it's whether you'll keep hiding them or start owning them as part of who you are. So now I want to hear from you. Which of these dark sides resonated the most with your own experience? Drop it in the comments because sharing it might just help another INFJ feel a little less alone. And if you felt seen in this video, don't forget to subscribe and come back because here, your inner world isn't too much. It's exactly what we're here to explore.